Hi everyone, this is the week 2 video to help you through the readings and give you just a heads up on what to expect. So week 2 we continue with Crosby and we move towards our exam, which is on August 6th and due by 11:59 p.m. I will be giving you excuse me, I will be giving you the questions for the exam no later than August 2nd, and you will know exactly how to write it and how to turn it in. There will be very little surprise on it. I haven't yet formulated it exactly, but for the most part, it should be relatively easy for you to prepare for, at least insofar as you'll know what to expect. It still will be difficult material, and of course I have office hours this week on Monday at 12 and Thursday at 12 and on Zoom. And if any of you can't fit that time or meet that time, let me know. Or you have questions via email, go ahead and let me know. I'm happy to answer them. But the exam will be basically just asking you to show me that you understand in depth the material, starting all the way with Russell and the value of philosophy through convince me that I'm wrong, and then Kant, and then all of the reading that we did in Crosby. Um, One thing that I did forget to do, I thought I had included in the video last week, and therefore I asked you about it in your quiz on the second quiz of last week, and it ended up being unfair, was to ask you about the question of merely. So I went back, and I will send an email out about this as well, but I went back and changed all the grades on the quiz for any of you who got that question wrong. What I meant to emphasize was that Kant, and the reading does say this, but I really wanted to emphasize it because it's really important, and a lot of people get it wrong. Even philosophers sometimes get it wrong when they talk about Kant's ethics. Kant's idea of respect for persons is that you can never treat a person as merely a means to an end. Merely. So if you go back and look at the reading, page 182 talks about the 5 different ways that Lars was treated as merely a means to an end. And they included things like they didn't give him enough information so that he could make a choice based upon all the information available. They used him, they profited from him, they were deceitful to him, they didn't treat him like a friend, those kind of things. And the best way in our lives to understand when we're treated, I think, as merely a means to an end is when we feel that people have used us. We say, I was used by him, or I was used by her. This is going to intersect, of course, with Crosby, who also talks about never treating a person as merely a means to an end, building clearly off of Kant's morality. Um, and uh, And the idea with Kant is that we are all persons, humans are persons, and you have to have a respect for persons. And the respect that you give to a person means that they can never just be collapsible into your plans. That is, they have an integrity, a wholeness, a depth to them that can never be simply folded, collapsed, whatever you want to say, into your plans. So you can't say, I just want to have sex and I'm going to use her for her body. Well, when you do that, you don't see her. And this is, excuse me, this is Crosby's point of view with the sex worker, which I can understand that some of you might disagree with. He wasn't taking, as I said in the notes, he wasn't taking a shot at sex workers. He was saying that to the sex worker and to the person who hires the sex worker, in either case, there's not a personal relationship. What's desired is a body. And say the person who uses you for your car because they want to take they need a ride to the airport. They don't care about you. They just, anybody who was a ride would count. And that's why afterwards, when you realize that they didn't really care about you, they just needed a ride to the airport, you say, she was using me. Or when a guy wants to get to know you simply because your dad is the head of a company or your mom is the head of a company, and he wants to get an interview with your mom. Well, you realize that he doesn't care about you personally. He only cares about you insofar as you intersect with his plans. These are what Kant means by merely. When you treat a person as merely a means to an end. Because we treat people as means to an end all the time. I'm treating you all as a means to an end to get paid. Okay, does that mean that that's the only thing I care about? No. Obviously, I hope it's pretty clear I care deeply about ethics, but you all and your papers and you being in this class are a means to an end. I am a means to an end for you to get rid of your ethics core requirement. Again, nothing wrong with that. You go to a restaurant, somebody serves you. You go to Starbucks, somebody makes your coffee. You go to a mechanic and somebody works on your car. These are all ways that we treat people as a means to an end. There is nothing wrong with that. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether we're talking about the barista or the professor or the mechanic or the server. When does it become merely? So when I would wait tables, as I did many years, I could tell that to many people, I was just a thing. I might as well have been defined as that which brings me food. They didn't care about my personal story. They didn't care about my integrity. They didn't care about anything about me except for I was the conduit through which the food came. I was collapsible or folded into their interests insofar as I was that which brought them food. Okay, so again, Kant's claim is not that we can't treat persons as a means to an end, but that we can never treat persons as merely a means to an end. And this, of course, intersects with Crosby, because Crosby, when he looks at the various scenarios of the scapegoat or slavery or breeding or the sex worker, in those cases, he's trying to say, what is it about them? Look, just stepping back and looking at them, what are some of the things that we understand about persons? Instead of trying to, as I said in my notes last time, instead of trying to work at personhood by trying to define it, why don't we first look at the cases where we feel comfortable saying it was denied, personhood was denied, and then from that, what rules could we come up with? And of course, one of them he comes up with is never treat a person as merely a means to an end. And that's because when we do that, we have it's a profound disrespect for persons. Well, last week you finished up with Crosby and you took your quiz. This week, of course, you have the 2 quizzes and then you have the exam at the end of the week. And we will then finish the first part of the quarter and move on to the next part, which is on character. And we'll be dealing mostly with Aristotle on habits and justice and friendship in particular, and choices. But this first part is, of course, based on personhood combined with the early readings on the definition of philosophy and its value, and convince me that I'm wrong and giving reasons. And so last week we read at the end of the week, we read Crosby. We're now finishing up Crosby this week. And as we move into Crosby, we have, of course, again, see the link to Kant and never treating a person as merely a means to an end. And his argument about personhood is interesting and is very philosophical, and it can be very difficult at times for those of you, which I'm assuming is most of you, have never had a philosophy class, and you're not going to major in philosophy, which again, nothing wrong with that. But this is a philosophy class, and there are some levels to this that are difficult. If you think about what it means to be a person, just on a basic level, if you say, you meet somebody and you're comfortable saying they are a person. Let's say you're a scientist. Let's say you're going into engineering, or you're going into chemistry or physics or biology, and you're comfortable dealing with the sciences. You're comfortable dealing with empirical data and verification and quantitative methods, and that's what you do, okay? Well, let's say you come across somebody and you are talking to them and you see them as a person. Do you realize that there is no empirical data to show you that they're a person? There's no microscopes, there's no chemical test, there's no physical test, there's no biological test to tell you they're a person. The biology may tell you that you're dealing with Homo sapien. The chemistry might tell you that you're dealing with an organic being. And the physics may tell you about questions of kinesthetics and stuff I don't understand. But none of that will point to a person, because person is a moral category. Person is a philosophical category. So you can't use science to answer a philosophical question. Just as much as you can't use philosophy to answer a scientific question. Everybody needs to stay in their lane. Well, personhood is a philosophical or moral category. It can also be a legal category, but it is primarily a moral category. Well, if that's true, how is it that we know we're confronted with a person? How do we know that we're dealing with people? How do we know that we shouldn't treat X as merely a means to an end because X is a person to us? And this is an incredibly important topic. The 20th century is all full of history of treatment of the Jews, people who are murdered, misogyny, all throughout history, treatment of course, slaves, especially Black Americans, where personhood was never recognized. And we understand that that was incredibly harmful. It is one of the most harmful things you can do, to not see the personhood in the other. But think about it. If a Nazi was convinced that a Jewish person to you was not a person, how would you prove it to them? Do you all see? It's not like something you could prove in chemistry or prove in physics or prove in something else. It's a moral category. So you would have to try to invite them to get rid of their prejudices and see what people like Crosby would say humans are kind of made to see. That is, and confront or encounter, as I say in my notes, we encounter persons. And I also in this week's materials, we encounter persons, but we can't never know them. Like, we don't have knowledge of a person. Well, Crosby morally tries to unpack this, and this is very difficult because he's trying to articulate things we don't usually articulate. We can talk about things on a somewhat of a surface level, never treat a person as merely a means to an end, and don't treat a person as a mere specimen, and it's wrong to breed people, those kind of things. But if you had to go back in time and you had to talk to a slaveholder in Alabama in 1840s, how would you convince them that slavery was wrong? You would have to somehow get them to see that the slave is a person, and feel comfortable that once they fully see that, they'll see that they can never treat them this way. Well, again, being a very difficult topic, Crosby is trying to unpack that and trying to explain what we kind of somewhat already know, unless we're prejudiced, unless we're already, and what does prejudice mean? Prejudge. We prejudge against Jewish persons, we prejudge against women, we prejudge against homosexuals, we prejudge against persons of color, so that we don't allow the body to encounter them, the human to encounter them. We prejudge them and then already put them into categories. So how would you would have to get the slaveholder to stop their prejudging about Black people are this and Black people are that, and somehow get them to see the person. And then once they see the person, understand that they can never own them. You can't own a person. That's what Crosby's trying to talk about. And so one of the things he talks about, and we finished last week on this, is that the actions of persons come from the being of persons. So the actions that we have reveal the being. And the more we understand the being, the more we will understand the actions. And of course, that becomes important because oftentimes throughout history, we've tried to get persons to act by coercing them, by whipping them, by tricking them, by fooling them. Things that Kant would say is treating a person as merely a means to an end, and was done to Lars, manipulate people. We've done that throughout history. And therefore, what happens, and I explain this in my notes as well, when we do that, then the actions are not the actions of a person because they did not come from the being of a person. You did not persuade them. You did not give them reasons that they could therefore act from. And this is why I keep italicizing through themselves. Actions are only personal actions when persons act through themselves, that is, from their being, and do so freely. But instead, when we want an action, we want their labor, we want their decision, we want them to agree to have sex with us, whatever it is, when we want an action, we therefore manipulate them so that we get the action, but we don't get the action that is the action coming from the being of that person. And in doing that, therefore, we profoundly disrespect their ability to make choices, again, as was done with Lars, and Tuskegee and other examples from last week, and we profoundly disrespect their ability to choose and their ability to be a full person. And so he emphasizes, and it's at the tail end again of last week and the beginning of this week, and it's super important, is that notion of with being then comes through to action. Make sure you reread that several times. It's after 25, and make sure that you read that till you get that down real well. Then he moves on to the other part, and I spent a lot of time in the second note set on this, which is the discussion of incommunicability. And incommunicability is difficult to understand because the word is a bad word. He chose this word that's unfortunate. What he basically means is that there's part of me that's not shareable with you. And it stays with me. And part of the respecting of persons, not treating them as a mere specimen, for example, or breeding them, is understanding that they have a incommunicable part of them that can never be shared with other people. And again, this is very difficult. He gives a beautiful, actually stunning example, really, of a newspaper as probably the most insignificant notion of being, because the whole point of a newspaper is to share and in its being. That is, you read it and you get the information and you don't care what's left. It could be on any paper. So the actual part of the newspaper that stays in the newspaper is so immaterial that it doesn't matter. The only thing you care about in the newspaper is the shareable part, is the communicable part. Well, the way that he articulates that is that with persons, each one of us has various attributes, but the attributes do not, how should I put this? The attributes do not equal up to who we are. If you said Brian, me, you said Brian Buckley has attributes 1 to 10,000, okay? Then if you found somebody else with the same attributes, then you could maybe kill me and replace me with that, and there would be no loss, because all I am are those 10,000 attributes, and you just replace them. And if that seems absurd to you, the reason it seems absurd to you is because there is a part of me that goes beyond my attributes. And there's a part of me that stays with me, because if you and I are in contact, and there's a part of me that's shared with you or shared with the world. My hair color is shared. Many other things in the world are brown. My height is shared in inches. Many other things in the world have inches. My various parts of my being are shared. And again, this is in the notes number 2. So make sure you read through them carefully, because this is very difficult stuff. There's an aspect of me that's universal, that can be understood universally. Like, for example, the word dog is universal. The word brown is universal. Many things can be dog. This Chihuahua is a dog. This German Shepherd's a dog. They all participate in the universal. Well, there's parts of me that are universal. Most of me. But if you try to articulate and describe, write down every single attribute of me that is communicable to you, because it's universal, the hair color, the skin color, the height, the whatever it is, even things like introvert, extrovert, there you would still say, but there is a part of him that I cannot capture. There's a part of him that is not shareable. It stays with him. It is a concrete wholeness. Now, with the newspaper, the concrete wholeness is just matter. It's just stuff. But with me, or with persons, we understand that there's an element to them that simply is almost difficult to articulate. That's why Crosby uses the word infinite, right? Cannot count it. That the person is almost infinite. You're confronted with something that stops the world, if you will, and is not repeatable, and is not interchangeable, and is more than its attributes. And we somehow know this. Yes, we can be trained to forget it if we're prejudiced, but somehow we already know this. And what is that thing that demands our respect? Because most of the discussions of personhood then build off the moral, and this is what Crosby says at the beginning of the book, and building off of the moral means that we understand that once we're confronted with a person, morality comes to play. I should not just treat them any way I want. I should respect their name. I should treat them with dignity and respect. I should not treat them as merely a means to an end. And he's trying to articulate this when he says, for example, that you can't count persons. Or the example I give, if every person who ever existed is all in this huge field of 100 billion people, think about all the shareable attributes that they have. The hair colors, the heights, all the shareable attributes. And your mother is standing next to you, and your mother has many of the shareable attributes of all of the others, or mixed in with the others. But does your mother lose anything by being amidst all the other persons who ever lived? And I think the answer clearly is no, because she's a person. She doesn't lose anything by being amidst all the other persons who have all the other attributes, and many of them that she shares, because there's something beyond her that is not shareable. Okay? That's what he's trying to articulate. And he thinks that somehow we already know this. So it's not a matter of him trying to convince us as much as it is, in what's called phenomenology, trying to show us or describe for us what we already know, and to get us to unpack it. And those pages 49 to 53 are super important in that part. Now, when we move on to the third reading, which again, the notes will be there. I have not yet finished them, but they will be there by the by the time you do the reading, the last set of the readings before the exam. And he will again talk about things like other aspects of personhood beyond incommunicability, beyond non-sharing. For example, persons can get lost in the world, and he uses a term there. It's again in the notes, but I wanted to articulate it clearly. Recollect. Again, I wish he hadn't used this term, but he's saying that somehow we can lose control of ourselves and our specialness and let ourselves, just like the deferential wife loses herself in what she's doing, we can lose ourselves in our projects and kind of say, oh, okay, I'm not really a person. I'm just a gap filler. I'm just a person who does this. I just do this. I'm just a husband. I'm just a wife. I'm just a parent. And like Kant would say, that's treating a person as merely a means to an end. You're treating yourself as merely a means to an end. So Crosby uses this interesting notion of recollect, not recollect like remember, but recollect, regather, not allow ourselves to be spread out in the world, but pull ourselves back into what we are as a person so that we can then recognize that and have respect for ourselves and understand ourselves fully as a person. Again, I've already gone 25 minutes, so it's a long time, but this will be, more of this in the third part will be in the Crosby, the third set of Crosby readings, okay? All right, so I hope this is enough to get you through the week. Be very patient in the second set, or in the readings having to do with incommunicability. It is difficult, but if you just remember it means not sharing and you try to see what he's trying to show you, not prove to you, he's not giving you logic, he's trying to show it to you. Allow yourself to say, well, how is it that I somehow know that persons are special? What is it that I can somehow articulate, and can he help me do that? Okay? All right, I hope that was good enough, and remember that I have office hours on Monday and Thursday. Have a good week.